Vladimir, thank you very much. And thank you to the Vasil Stefanik Pre-Carpathian University for hosting this important gathering and for inviting me. I feel very much honored to be part of it. And if I might, I'd like to speak for not a long time so that we could have some discussion, because I would also be very grateful to hear what the university is doing and areas where I might be helpful, or the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network might be helpful, and also what are the major challenges for sustainable development and the sustainable development goals as you see them from your perspective. So I'll make some opening comments and then look forward to the discussion. I am a believer in the concept of sustainable development as the very important and useful organizing principle for global cooperation. The idea of sustainable development is that we should have a triple bottom line in our societal objectives. That is, we should have an economic objective of higher living standards and a better economy, good livelihoods, and decent incomes for people everywhere. Second, we should have social justice. The United Nations uses the expression, leave no one behind. The idea is that we can't look at the average well-being in a society or in the world. We have to make sure that those who are the poorest or the most excluded or the most in need are attended to. And I think that this is a very important moral commitment. The third objective of sustainable development, of course, is the environmental objective. The idea of sustainable development emerged with the recognition that the way that we are managing the economic life, with the management of industry, with the expansion of the world economy, is posing great dangers for humanity because of the environmental destruction. And of course, this was not recognized in most of human history, but it began to be understood in the 1970s and the 1980s. And the more we do understand, the more we see interconnected environmental crises. Of course, climate change is the most dramatic for the longer term, and we are in a very serious advanced stage of human-caused global warming. The destruction of the biodiversity is also very far advanced. The number of species driven to extinction and the decline of the abundance of other species is alarming. The massive pollution known in Ukraine, known in the United States, known in the Black Sea region is phenomenally large. Every ecosystem has been affected: the soils, the air, the water supplies, the oceans, the plastics pollution is pervasive. And of course, with COVID-19, we recognize so dramatically that the disruption of natural habitats is leading to the spread of new diseases like the COVID-19. But this is not the first in recent memory. This is the fifth or sixth emerging disease of the 21st century. So the idea of sustainable development is to combine all three objectives: the economic, the social, and the environmental objective. And it's not easy. Our political systems are not geared towards this. Our political leaders are not geared towards this. Our businesses are not geared towards this. Even our universities were not very well geared towards this, because to address challenges like sustainable development require an interdisciplinary structure where engineers, scientists, economists, policy analysts are all working together, which, as we know in our universities, isn't always the case as well. So from many points of view, political, institutional, technological, educational, we were not very well geared towards sustainable development. In 1992, when this idea was first put to the world in the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, many treaties were adopted, including on climate change and biodiversity, and the concept of sustainable development was formally adopted by the world, but nothing changed, I would say. Our governments continued to do what they were doing before. Our politics continued as before. The destruction of the environment continued as before. And in the United States, we became more and more unequal, more and more unjust in our society. We in the US could not focus on this challenge. With Donald Trump, we had a president who was absolutely against every principle of sustainable development. He favored more inequality, he favored more wealth for the rich, he favored more corruption, and he favored more environmental destruction. So this is not a simple matter, and we just ended the worst presidency we ever had with this idiot, unfortunately, who took us completely in the wrong direction. But now I think, I'm in an optimistic day, actually, I have to say, which isn't always the case, because there was a good meeting yesterday at the White House. It was a virtual meeting, which I also liked. We didn't have to move all these world leaders to spend $1 billion to move them to a meeting. They just did it by Zoom, like we're doing. And 40 world leaders got together to talk about the climate crisis yesterday. And it was actually a good meeting because it reflected the fact that maybe there's more seriousness emerging. Of course, we have a decent president now, so this is a big advance, and it helps the United States to orient. But we had all the main big economy leaders together, and they all pretty much said the right thing, which was unusual. They even agreed with each other, more or less, that we need to take climate action decisively. And they talked about, one by one, the case for decarbonizing the energy system, shifting from fossil fuels to wind, solar, hydro, and so forth, land and nature-based solutions. Even President Bolsonaro of Brazil, who was terrible when Trump was president, all of a sudden became an environmentalist now that Biden is president. And so there was a dramatic change in his rhetoric yesterday, promising how Brazil was going to abide by the Paris Climate Agreement. So it shows it's at least possible to get our global politics around this agenda. What's actually involved in this? Well, there are two main global agreements, of course, that we are needing to fulfill. One is the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals adopted by every UN member state in September 2015. And these are goals that are for all of the three bottom lines: the economic objectives, the social objectives, and the environmental objectives. And there's also the Paris Climate Agreement, which calls on all of the world to change our energy system from fossil fuel based to zero carbon energy, and to do so in order to keep the rise of Earth's temperature to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And yesterday's meeting, virtual meeting called by Biden, was actually an important step forward, as I mentioned. So these are the two broad agreements. And it's worth saying a word about how we're doing on this. They were both agreed at the end of 2015. Then Trump came to the presidency in the United States. So the US did nothing on those for 4 years. And because of the role of the United States, the absence of the US leadership was very bad for the whole world. In fact, of course, Trump picked fights with everybody because he's really was an emotionally disturbed person, actually. And that showed up in our foreign policy, too. Created problems for every country in the world, including Ukraine. And so we didn't accomplish a lot during this period. Probably the European Union was the only place that made some conceptual progress because Europe adopted a European Green Deal that it was working on during this period. And that was the diplomatic agreement among the 27 EU members to pursue the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. Then, of course, came COVID last year, and that was a huge setback for everything because it's a disaster, and we're still not done fighting it. And the global cooperation on COVID has been very little. Every country has been on its own. There's really been no global cooperation of a meaningful sort during this whole pandemic. So this has been also not only a disaster in its own right, but it's been a very sad fact that we haven't had decent cooperation on the vaccine distribution or on many other steps that should be taken to stop the pandemic. So that brings us up to yesterday and today with this climate summit, a new president, finally the vaccines being implemented and scaled up, not perfectly, but at least I think on a better track, and the attention turning to the Sustainable Development Agenda. We have a lot of catching up to do because we're supposed to achieve targets by the year 2030 for the SDGs. We're way behind on that. And then, of course, to achieve the Paris objective of keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, we need a dramatic pace of decarbonization of the energy system. And so this is really the challenge as we arrive at your important meeting today. How can we accelerate? And my own view is that every government needs to have a plan of acceleration. It needs to be a plan to achieve the SDGs and to achieve the Paris Agreement. It should be based heavily on two concepts, on green and on digital. On the green, it should be based on energy transformation and reduction of pollution and land use conservation. So those three elements. And on digital, it should be based on extending the use of digital technologies and digital services so that we can accelerate progress on smart energy systems, on education, partly online, on telemedicine, on government services, on online banking and payments. In other words, use the digital technology as our leapfrog technology to accelerate progress. And I believe that we need to have strong action plans supported by universities helping to design them, and then strong financial plans so that governments can actually put these ideas into operation. And here is, of course, a huge challenge. In the United States, we have a lot of money. It's a rich economy. So we're spending trillions of dollars. That's good. I'm in favor of it. But what about Ukraine? What about other countries that don't have such large access to financing? What should be done? And there, what I am advocating is a major expansion of the global development financing in institutions like the European Investment Bank or the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, or the World Bank, or other infrastructure financing institutions, because what we need is ways for countries like Ukraine that have a big transformation ahead to have the financial means to achieve that transformation. I'm also very much hoping, and I know it's a little bit idealistic, and Ukraine is right in the center of so many of the problems, that we could have geopolitical cooperation to get this done. I was happy that at yesterday's summit, President Xi Jinping was participating, President Putin was participating. This is important that you have, that we move beyond, the very tough confrontations and try to find ways to cooperate peacefully, urgently, and in building economies, not in sanctions and all the other actions that are so destructive, and especially for Ukraine right now, in the middle of all of this. This is a very big practical difficulty. So I am every day preaching global cooperation. I'm trying to say to Americans, we don't need a Cold War with China. I'm trying to say that we actually can find a path of cooperation between Europe, Russia, China, the United States, all of which would be terrific for Ukraine, which is in the middle of all of that, and feels all of the fallout whenever there is confrontation. So that is my basic message. We need a green and digital recovery. We need strong financing to bring it about. That's partly global tax reform, as the US finally is calling for. That's partly more financing from international financial institutions. And we need inter-regional cooperation and regional cooperation, especially to build infrastructure. So if we could get Europe and China and Russia cooperating on infrastructure, we could accelerate the development of renewable energy grids, of fiber connectivity, of fast rail, which would be such a great benefit for all of Europe and Asia. And if we can turn to a cooperative framework, I believe we can get this done. So those are my basic observations, and I look forward to some discussion.